A weapon existed that could set the sea itself ablaze. For centuries, the mere rumor of Greek fire was enough to shatter the morale of invading armies and save an empire from collapse. By the end of this story, you will understand how a single, lost formula held back the tide of history. We will uncover how it was made, how a city wielded it, and why its secret died with the civilization it protected. What does it truly take to guard a world-changing idea? The year was 674, and the greatest city in the world was under siege. A vast fleet from the rising Umayyad Caliphate had sailed right to the walls of Constantinople, a move that should have meant the end. The empire's land defenses were legendary, but here on the water, the city felt exposed. The enemy ships, packed with warriors, closed in with a terrifying confidence. They were about to encounter something that would rewrite the rules of naval warfare forever. On the decks of the Byzantine dromons, sailors stood ready at what looked like large bronze tubes. These were the siphons, the delivery system for a substance no one had ever seen in battle. As the Arab fleet drew within range, the order was given. What happened next was less like conventional combat and more like a nightmare brought to life. A continuous, roaring jet of liquid flame shot across the water, not in a graceful arc, but in a focused, direct stream. It struck the wooden hulls and sails of the enemy vessels and did not simply burn. It clung. It stuck to everything it touched, and when sailors threw buckets of seawater onto the flames, the fire did not go out. In many cases, it seemed to burn even more fiercely. The sea around the attacking ships became a sheet of fire, trapping them in an inescapable inferno. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. For the Arab forces, this was not a weapon of man. It seemed like a curse or the fury of the empire's god made manifest. The inventor credited with this miracle was a man named Kallinikos, a Syrian engineer who had fled to Constantinople. He did not create fire itself, of course, but he perfected a formula and, just as importantly, a reliable way to deploy it under the immense pressure of battle. This first decisive use at the siege of 674 was more than a tactical win. It was a declaration. It told the world that Constantinople was not just protected by stone, but by an unconquerable element. For the Byzantines, Greek fire became a tangible sign of divine protection, a heavenly safeguard for their Christian empire. For every enemy who heard the stories, it became a source of mythic dread, a reason to think twice before challenging the city on the sea. This single event established the weapon not merely as a tool, but as the very cornerstone of Byzantine naval power for centuries to come. But possessing such a power creates its own immense burden. How do you protect a secret that entire nations are desperate to steal? The answer lies in the extraordinary system of control the Byzantines built around their most prized possession. The secret of Greek fire was not just a recipe, it was an entire ecosystem of power. To grasp its true significance, you have to look at the machine built around it. Constantinople was a fortress city, protected by the immense Theodosian walls that made a land assault nearly impossible. But the seaward side, where the Golden Horn harbor lay, was a glaring vulnerability. An enemy fleet could bypass all those legendary stone defenses. So the Byzantine Empire did not just invent a weapon, they invented an entirely new branch of the military to wield it. This was the foundation of their naval dominance. At the heart of this force were the dromons, swift and maneuverable warships unlike any other. They were not designed for ramming or boarding actions alone. They were built as mobile artillery platforms with one primary purpose. Mounted on their bows were the bronze siphons, often covered with fearsome animal heads that made them look like metal beasts ready to breathe fire. The entire ship, from its construction to its crew training, existed to deliver that one terrifying substance. This integration went all the way to the top. The formula and its manufacturing process were not left to independent alchemists. They were produced in secret imperial workshops, almost certainly within the secure confines of the great palace complex itself. Think of it as the most classified research and development project of the medieval world, under the direct supervision of the emperor. Knowledge was fragmented, with different teams perhaps knowing only one part of the process, ensuring no single person could ever sell or betray the complete secret. This made Greek fire more than a tool, it was a state doctrine. Its use was a calculated psychological strategy, deployed at the perfect moment to maximize shock and awe. It turned the sea, the avenue of attack, into a defensive moat of flame. But what exactly was it that made this substance so uniquely horrifying to face? The mechanics of the weapon reveal a chilling blend of ancient chemistry and brutal ingenuity. The terrifying power of Greek fire began with a liquid that defied the natural world. It was a chemical enigma, a substance that seemed to possess a malevolent will of its own. While its exact formula vanished with the empire that guarded it, we can reconstruct a likely portrait from the clues left behind. Contemporary accounts are careful not to give specifics, but they use telling descriptions. They call it a prepared fire, or a liquid fire that clings and cannot be extinguished by water. This points us toward a base ingredient of crude petroleum, what we might call naphtha, likely gathered from natural oil seeps around the Black Sea. This raw, flammable oil was just the beginning. To make it a weapon, it needed to be transformed. Think of it like a medieval recipe where every addition served a brutal purpose. Pine resin was almost certainly mixed in, acting as a thick, sticky agent to make the flaming liquid adhere to wood, sails, and skin. Sulfur might have been added to make it ignite more easily, creating a lower, more reliable ignition point. Now, here is where the mystery deepens and where some of the most intriguing theories emerge. Some historians point to a possible ingredient called quicklime. This substance has a fascinating and dangerous property. It reacts violently with water, generating intense heat. If quicklime was part of the mixture, it would explain the persistent reports that water only made the fire burn more fiercely, as splashing waves would have actively fed the chemical reaction. Others wonder about an early form of saltpeter, a key component of later gunpowder, which could have added a more explosive quality. Yet the true secret likely was not one magical ingredient, but a precise and guarded process. It was the specific distillation of the petroleum, the exact ratios of the additives, and the meticulous method of combining them that created a stable, yet devastatingly effective, liquid weapon. This process was so valuable that it was never written down in a complete form. It was passed as a living secret from one master craftsman to the next, under the watchful eyes of the emperor's guards. The loss of that knowledge is why, even today, we are still piecing together the puzzle from fragments. But knowing what was in the cauldron is only half the story. The other, equally brilliant half was the machine designed to unleash it. How do you safely project a raging inferno from a wooden ship onto the deck of another? The true genius of Greek fire lay not just in the chemistry, but in the engineering that brought it to life. This was a weapon designed for the chaos of a naval battle, and its delivery system had to be as reliable as it was terrifying. At the heart of this system was the Siphon, a masterpiece of medieval military technology. It was far more than a simple tube, mounted on the prows of the swift Droman warships or along the sea walls of Constantinople itself. The Siphon was a pressurized cannon designed for one purpose: to project controlled chaos. Historians studying ancient manuals and illustrations believe it operated using an advanced force pump, likely a dual piston system. One can picture a team of specialized crewmen below decks, working in a coordinated rhythm. As they pumped, they built pressure inside a sealed bronze reservoir filled with the prepared liquid. This was the critical innovation. It turned a flammable mixture into a weapon with range and precision. At the nozzle, a small brazier or a heated metal plate waited. The moment the pressurized liquid shot past this ignition point, it transformed into a roaring, focused jet of flame. The operator, often shielded by a large sheet of iron, could then direct this continuous stream with shocking accuracy for dozens of feet across the water. The sensory assault was overwhelming. Imagine the sound, a deep, guttural hiss mixed with the roar of fire, unlike anything heard in battle before. Visually, it was a nightmare, a solid-looking river of fire that seemed to defy the wind and rain. For an enemy sailor, this was not an arrow or a stone you could dodge. It was an elemental force being aimed directly at you. This technological marvel gave the Byzantines something priceless in warfare, a decisive stand-off weapon. They could unleash devastation from a distance, shattering enemy formations and setting ships ablaze long before boarding parties could even get close. The psychological dominance was absolute, but how did this fearsome combination of chemistry and engineering actually perform when the fate of an empire hung in the balance? Its most legendary test was yet to come. The open sea was where Greek fire transformed from a weapon into a form of psychological warfare. Byzantine admirals did not simply add it to their existing tactics, they built an entire naval doctrine around its unique horror. The fleet's formation itself was designed for maximum terror. Warships would arrange themselves in a wide crescent or a disciplined line, with the siphon-armed dromons positioned at the forefront. Their objective was precise and chilling, to project not just flames but utter panic. A single, accurate stream of that clinging fire could leap from sail to sail, from deck to deck, turning a tight formation into a single, spreading inferno. Imagine the chain reaction, the shouts of alarm turning to screams as the one element sailors relied on. The sea all around them became an enemy. Throwing water on the flames was not just futile, it could be catastrophic, potentially intensifying the chemical blaze. This created an invisible barrier of dread, a no-go zone in the water around any Byzantine vessel. The mere sight of those bronze tubes on the horizon was enough to unravel an enemy's battle plan before a single flame was lit. One of the most devastating demonstrations came in the year 941. A massive fleet of Kievan Rus warriors, seeking to challenge the empire, sailed toward Constantinople. They were met not with a conventional navy, but with a wall of fire. Historical accounts describe a scene of apocalyptic destruction, with the sea itself appearing to burn, and the invaders' ships consumed to ash. This naval dominance had profound consequences far beyond any single battle. By making the waterways around their capital a realm of absolute security, the Byzantines protected the lifelines of their empire. Vital trade routes for grain, silk, and gold remained open, fueling the city's immense wealth. Invasions by sea, once the greatest threat to Constantinople, became a calculated and often suicidal gamble. For centuries, controlling the secret formula meant controlling the Mediterranean's destiny. Yet the ultimate test for this legendary weapon was not on the rolling waves, but in the confined, desperate space beneath the city's own towering walls. But the greatest test for Greek fire was not on the open water. It was in the shadow of the city's own legendary stone defenses. The Theodosian walls were already a masterpiece of military architecture, a triple-layered barrier of brick and mortar that had repelled armies for centuries. Yet the Byzantines understood that stone alone could not stop every threat, so they integrated their most fearsome invention directly into the fortifications, creating a defense that was both physical and profoundly psychological. High on the battlements, modified versions of the great naval siphons were mounted at strategic points, their bronze nozzles peering out over the landscape like watchful dragons. Their role here was different, a grim form of area denial. Imagine an enemy army having survived a march across continents, finally arriving at the fabled walls. They begin constructing massive wooden siege towers, rolling them slowly toward the stone. From above, a silent calculation takes place. Then, with a sudden roar, a jet of liquid fire arcs down, not onto the men, but onto their carefully built machines. The towering structure, a project of weeks, becomes a funeral pyre in moments, its crew trapped within a cage of clinging flame. For those attempting to scale the walls with ladders, the horror was even more direct. There was no hiding from a substance that could flow downward, following the contours of the stone, seeking out every foothold and shelter. Alongside these mounted projectors, the defenders employed a more personal, terrifying tool, the Siphon. These were hand-thrown clay pots or grenades, filled with the same dreadful mixture and ignited with a fuse. They could be lobbed from the walls by soldiers or launched in volleys from catapults, raining fire down into the massed troops below. This created a multi-layered hellscape for any attacker. An assault from the sea, you faced the Dromons. An assault from the land, you now faced fire from above, while potentially still within range of the naval defenses on the Golden Horn. It made a coordinated attack from multiple directions a logistical nightmare. The reputation of these defenses became a weapon in itself. For a general planning a campaign, the calculus changed. It was no longer a question of whether you could breach the walls, but whether you could survive the journey to reach them. The walls, already the strongest in the world, were made psychologically impenetrable. Constantinople was not just a fortress, it was a carefully engineered death trap, and that knowledge saved the city from more sieges than the weapon ever actually fought. This strategic deterrent was the ultimate goal, to make the cost of attack so unthinkably high that no one would even try. But such absolute power creates its own paradox. What happens when the secret that defines you begins to fade? The very system designed to protect it contained the seeds of its own eventual disappearance. The most chilling detail of Greek fire was not its burning, but the moment it was born. A jet of dark liquid would shoot from the bronze tube, and in the space between the siphon and its target, it would erupt into a roaring river of flame. This instantaneous ignition was a core part of its terror, and it presented a brilliant engineering puzzle. How do you safely light a stream of highly flammable liquid the instant it leaves your ship, without accidentally setting your own vessel on fire? Solving this riddle meant walking a razor's edge between controlled power and catastrophic self-destruction. One of the most practical and likely theories points to a simple, yet effective mechanism, a permanent pilot light. At the nozzle of the siphon, a small, shielded brazier would have burned constantly, perhaps fueled by oil or pitch. This created a stable, contained ignition source. When the pressurized mixture was forced through the tube at high speed, it would pass directly through this waiting flame. The result was immediate and reliable, a seamless transformation from liquid to fire the moment it cleared the ship. This system required immense discipline and training from the crew, a constant awareness of the live flame on their wooden deck, but it offered precise control. The operator could essentially turn the weapon on and off with the pump, starting and stopping the fiery jet at will. Yet there exists another, more haunting possibility, one that would have made the weapon seem truly alive. This theory centers on a potential ingredient, quicklime. In its dry state, quicklime is relatively stable, but when it comes into contact with water, it undergoes a violent chemical reaction, releasing a tremendous amount of heat. If quicklime was finely ground and mixed into the petroleum-based concoction, the moment the pressurized slurry sprayed into the moist, salty air of the sea, a reaction could begin. The moisture in the atmosphere might provide just enough trigger to generate intense heat, causing the mixture to auto-ignite a fraction of a second after leaving the tube. Imagine the psychological impact of that. To an enemy sailor, it would not look like a stream of fire being projected. but like a jet of liquid that spontaneously burst into flames mid-air, as if cursed by the very act of being launched. This self-igniting property would have eliminated any risk of a misfire on the Byzantine ship itself, while creating an utterly unpredictable and seemingly magical spectacle for those watching in horror. Whether through a clever pilot light or a reactive chemical trick, the instantaneous ignition served a deeper purpose than mere practicality. It completed the illusion of a raw, elemental force being harnessed. There was no visible match struck, no torch applied, no obvious human action between the release of the liquid and the birth of the inferno. For the medieval mind, this blurred the line between advanced technology and divine wrath. It made the weapon feel less like a tool and more like a living extension of the Empire's will, a breath of fire summoned at command. This carefully crafted mystery was as vital to Greek fire's power as the chemistry itself, transforming a terrifying substance into an unbeatable legend. But legends, by their nature, are fragile. The very obsession with secrecy that made the weapon so potent would ultimately lead to its silent disappearance from the world. The formula for Greek fire was guarded with a level of secrecy that feels almost unimaginable today. It was not merely a recipe, it was the Empire's most vital state secret, protected by a system of deliberate fragmentation and absolute control. Think of it not as a single piece of information, but as a puzzle where each piece was held by a different, isolated group, ensuring no one person could ever see the complete picture. At the very top, it is believed that only the reigning emperor and perhaps one trusted master craftsman, often from a specific family dynasty, knew the full and precise formula. This was knowledge passed from one generation to the next in whispers, never on parchment. Below them, the process was broken down. One group of artisans might be responsible for distilling the crude petroleum. Another, completely separate workshop might prepare the precise blend of resins and additives. These teams likely never communicated, working in sealed environments under the watchful eyes of the Imperial Guard. Even the raw materials were sourced from distant and disparate locations, so that no merchant or spy could ever trace the entire supply chain back to a single recipe. This compartmentalization was enforced by the most severe oath imaginable, a vow of silence backed by the threat of a terrible fate for any betrayer and their entire family. The result of this obsessive security was absolute. For centuries, not a single written record of the complete formula survived or was ever allowed to exist. It lived and died as an oral tradition, a living secret. This raises a haunting paradox. Was the secret protected too well? The very system that made it impossible to steal also made it incredibly fragile. If that one family line was broken, if that one emperor died without passing on the knowledge, if a single link in this human chain failed, the flame could be extinguished forever. The immense value placed on this secrecy tells us everything about its worth to the Byzantines. We can measure that value not just by their actions, but by the desperate attempts of their rivals to uncover it. Numerous empires and armies tried to capture the secret for themselves with almost no success. There are accounts of spies being sent to Constantinople, of captured dromons being meticulously studied, and of prisoners being interrogated. Yet they all failed. The few instances where something resembling Greek fire appeared in other armies, like the occasional use of fire ships or basic incendiary mixtures, were pale imitations, lacking the terrifying, clinging, water-resistant qualities of the real thing. They could copy the idea of naval fire, but they could never replicate the Byzantine miracle. This consistent failure across centuries underscores a profound truth. The true secret was not just in the ingredients, but in the perfected, guarded process of creating and deploying it. It was a masterpiece of controlled chemistry that remained locked within the walls of a single city. But what happens when the walls themselves begin to crumble and the keepers of the flame can no longer hold their ground? For centuries, the world's greatest military powers tried and failed to steal the flame. The Arabs, having felt its fury firsthand, devoted immense resources to creating their own version. They developed advanced incendiary weapons, using naphtha and sulfur in siege warfare with terrifying effect, yet they never quite matched the Byzantine marvel. Their mixtures could burn, but they lacked the clinging, water-defying persistence, the reliable projection, and the seamless integration into naval combat that made Greek fire so uniquely devastating. The difference was not merely chemical, it was systemic. A captured siphon was a hollow trophy. Without the exact, viscous fuel that flowed through it at the correct pressure, the bronze tube was just a piece of metal. Without the years of drilled coordination between the pump crews and the nozzle operators, any attempt to use it would likely end in self-immolation. Other maritime rivals, like the rising Italian city-states of Venice and Genoa, desperately wanted the secret for themselves. They understood that controlling such a weapon meant controlling the Mediterranean's trade routes. They sent spies, they bribed, they interrogated prisoners. Yet the Byzantine wall of secrecy held. The recipe was not a list of ingredients one could memorize. It was a living craft protected by layers of state security and compartmentalized knowledge. This consistent, centuries-long failure reveals a profound truth. Greek fire was never just a substance in a jar. It was the pinnacle of a complete military-industrial complex. It was the specialized ships built around the siphons. It was the secret imperial factories with their fragmented production lines. It was the elite naval units trained from youth in its dangerous use. It was the tactical doctrine that turned the sea into a defensive weapon. An enemy could copy one piece, but they could never replicate the entire interlocking machine. This machine, however, was only as strong as the empire that built it, and as Constantinople's power began to wane, the once inviolable system started to show its first fatal cracks. The guardians of the flame were struggling to keep their own house in order. The true genius of Greek fire was not measured in ships burned, but in minds broken. In an age where the line between earthly conflict and divine judgment was thin, this weapon did more than destroy wood and flesh. It planted a seed of supernatural terror. To the deeply religious societies of the medieval world, a fire that raged upon the water was not just a clever trick of chemistry. It was an abomination, a defiance of natural law that could only be explained as a curse or a blessing from a higher power. The Byzantines understood this perfectly. Their emperors and church leaders did not shy away from this interpretation. They actively cultivated it. Official proclamations and chronicles framed Greek fire as a sacred gift from God, entrusted specifically to the Christian emperor to defend the faith against all unbelievers. It was not merely a weapon in their arsenal, it was a tangible sign of divine favor, a holy flame. This narrative turned every naval victory into a miracle and every defeat of their enemies into an act of celestial punishment. For the sailor on an opposing ship, this created a paralyzing crisis of faith. You were not just fighting men, you were challenging a power that seemed to have heaven itself on its side. How could you possibly prevail against that? The experience of facing it was designed to feel like a descent into a living hell. Imagine the sensory overload. First, the unnatural roar of the siphon, a sound unlike any catapult or trumpet. Then, the sight of that thick, glowing stream arcing toward you, not splashing into the water but flowing across its surface like liquid sunlight. It moved with a horrifying purpose, clinging to everything, climbing rigging, and seeming to chase men across the deck. The most chilling detail, repeated in terrified accounts, was its defiance of water. Throwing seawater on it was not just useless, it could make the flames leap higher. This broke a fundamental rule of survival at sea. In that moment, every instinct a sailor had for saving his ship and his life was rendered obsolete. That profound helplessness is what transformed fear into a strategic force. The dread began long before the fleets ever sighted each other. The rumor alone was a weapon. News traveled along trade routes and through military camps. Stories of entire fleets turned to ash on a burning sea. For an admiral planning an attack, the calculation changed. Engaging the Byzantine navy was no longer a risk. It was a potential suicide mission with a horrific, specific kind of demise. Many chose simply not to try. They would alter their routes, avoid contested waters, or abandon planned invasions altogether. This is the ultimate power of a psychological weapon. It wins conflicts without a single shot being fired. For generations, Greek fire saved Constantinople not just by winning battles, but by preventing them. It conserved the empire's finite soldiers and treasure, and it allowed the city to project an aura of invincibility that was far cheaper and more effective than any army. The weapon's reputation became a shield woven from myth and terror that guarded the city as steadfastly as its legendary stone walls. But a shield, no matter how strong, is only as durable as the arm that holds it. Behind the terrifying spectacle of the Siphon lay a hidden empire of its own. To fuel the dragon's breath, the Byzantines built one of the most secretive and vital supply chains of the medieval world. This was not a matter of mixing a few barrels in a hidden cellar. It was a massive, state-run industrial operation that stretched across the Black Sea. The lifeblood of Greek fire was naphtha, a raw, volatile crude oil that seeped naturally from the ground in specific regions. Historical clues point to the Crimean Peninsula and the lands around the Caucasus Mountains as the primary sources. These were not oil fields as we know them today, but natural springs and tar pits where the black liquid pooled on the surface or bubbled up through the soil. Securing these sites was a military priority in itself. Once collected, the crude oil began a perilous journey. It was loaded into specially crafted clay amphorae or sealed wooden barrels designed to prevent both leakage and the dangerous buildup of fumes. These containers were then transported on a dedicated fleet of unmarked cargo ships, sailing a guarded route across the Black Sea to Constantinople. Overland, they might have moved in heavily guarded caravans, their true contents known only to a handful of imperial officers. Upon arrival, the cargo did not go to a public dock. It was taken to secret, fortified warehouses, likely within the secure grounds of the Great Palace or another imperial compound. Here, the next stage of the secret began, the transformation from raw material into weapon. The crude naphtha was a messy, inconsistent substance. To become the stable, fiery liquid of legend, it required precise refinement. This process, distillation, was another closely guarded state secret. Artisans would slowly heat the crude oil in sealed vessels, capturing and condensing the vapors to separate the lighter, more flammable fractions from the heavier residues. This was a delicate and dangerous art, requiring exact temperatures and timing to produce the perfect weapon-grade fuel. The scale of this entire operation, from collection to refinement to storage, reveals a critical truth. Greek fire was not a rare, last resort weapon pulled out in moments of desperation. It was a standard, integrated part of Byzantine military readiness. The empire maintained a standing inventory, a strategic reserve of terror, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The dedicated transport ships, the secret refineries, the warehouses full of amphorae, all of this represented a colossal investment of wealth, manpower, and imperial attention. This logistical machine was the unsung hero of the weapon's success. It meant that when an enemy fleet appeared on the horizon, the defenders of Constantinople did not need to scramble to concoct a miracle. They simply needed to issue an order. The system was already in place, tested and reliable. The supply chain was the weapon's steady heartbeat, a rhythm that pulsed through the empire for centuries. But a heartbeat depends on a strong body. As the empire's borders contracted and its control over distant regions weakened, this vital lifeline would become the first and most fragile link to break. Yet the most legendary siege in its history would push this entire system to its absolute limit. In the year 717, a force arrived at the walls of Constantinople that seemed unstoppable. An immense Arab army, over 100,000 strong, settled in for a long siege on the landward side, while a fleet of nearly 2,000 ships sealed the city off from the sea. For over a year, the very survival of the empire hung in the balance. This was the ultimate test, a scenario where the weapon's reputation for invincibility would either be proven true or shattered forever. Emperor Leo III understood that conventional defense would not be enough. He turned to his most feared asset, but this time its use would require more than shock tactics. It demanded perfect timing and ruthless strategy. A critical moment arrived when the Arab fleet, confident in its blockade, moved in closer to support the final land assault. The gates of the Golden Horn harbor swung open, and the Byzantine drummen surged out. What followed was not a battle, but an orchestrated inferno. The Siphons roared to life, their jets of clinging fire leaping across the narrow stretch of water. The tightly packed Arab vessels, with their wooden hulls and linen sails, offered the perfect fuel. Panic spread as the fire jumped from ship to ship, turning the blockade into a sprawling, inescapable bonfire that lit up the night sky. The destruction of the fleet was catastrophic, but the weapon's strategic use did not end there. Byzantine forces also deployed Greek fire from the city walls, targeting the massive wooden siege towers and supply ships the Arabs relied upon. Each towering engine, a project of months, became a funeral pyre in minutes. The combination was devastating. It severed the besieging army from its reinforcements and its food. This naval and logistical disaster, combined with an unusually brutal winter and attacks on their land forces by Bulgarian allies of the empire, broke the siege completely by 718. The Arab forces, decimated and demoralized, retreated. The victory's impact echoed far beyond the city's walls. Historians often note that this was more than a military triumph. It was a pivotal moment for the entire region. By turning back this colossal invasion, Constantinople did not just save itself, it created a barrier that reshaped the course of history. The security provided by Greek fire guaranteed the empire another 3 centuries of relative stability. Within those centuries, shielded from the constant threat of conquest, Byzantine culture, art, law, and scholarship flourished. It became a preserved repository of ancient knowledge and a beacon of innovation. Its safety purchased in no small part by the terror of a flame that could burn on water. The siege of 717 proved the weapon was not just a tool for battle, but the very cornerstone of an empire's enduring legacy. Yet the weapon's true power was not confined to the chaos of battle. For the rulers of Constantinople, Greek fire was also a brilliant instrument of theater, a spectacle designed to be witnessed in peace as much as in war. The Byzantines were unparalleled masters of what they called theatron, the strategic use of awe and ceremony to project power. Within the sprawling complex of the Great Palace, a different kind of demonstration was likely staged for visiting foreign dignitaries. Imagine the scene: a lavish banquet concludes under the stars, and the conversation turns to matters of alliance and tribute. Then, as if by imperial command, a jet of roaring flame would suddenly illuminate the night, arcing over a reflecting pool or harbor inlet, its reflection dancing on the marble facades of the palace. This was not an act of war, but a meticulously crafted message. For an envoy from a rival kingdom or a potential ally, the experience was visceral and unforgettable. It translated abstract notions of military strength into a sensory, undeniable reality. The message was clear: the empire you are treating with does not merely possess armies, it commands the very elements. This ceremonial use transformed Greek fire from a naval weapon into a symbol of the emperor's divine mandate and the empire's superior techne, its advanced craft and knowledge. It became a tool of soft power, a silent, flaming argument that reinforced every diplomatic negotiation. The substance itself was a state secret, but its terrifying effects were a public spectacle, a reminder that the empire's reach and ingenuity were boundless. In this way, the weapon's reputation was actively curated, its mystery carefully preserved not just through secrecy, but through controlled displays of overwhelming force. The flame that protected the city on the water also served to illuminate the unchallengeable authority of the man who sat upon its throne. This dual nature, as both a practical weapon and a potent symbol, cemented its place as the living heart of Byzantine identity. But symbols, like flames, require constant fuel, and the empire that created this masterpiece of power was beginning to falter. Ironically, the weapon's greatest strength became its fatal weakness. For over 500 years, Greek fire was so perfectly effective that it created a kind of technological complacency. Why innovate when you already possess the ultimate deterrent? The Byzantine naval doctrine, built entirely around the Siphon and its terrifying fuel, saw little need for fundamental change. The system worked, and so it was preserved, not evolved. This left the empire's maritime power resting on a single, fragile pillar. While Constantinople guarded its secret, the world beyond its walls was not standing still. New ship designs emerged in rival ports, tactics adapted. The very notion of naval warfare began its slow transformation, but the Byzantines, secure behind their wall of flame, had less incentive to keep pace. Their masterpiece of the 7th century was by the 11th a relic of a past age, however potent it still remained. The secret itself was another victim of its own success. Guarded through fragmentation and silence, it existed only in the minds of a select few and in the routines of isolated workshops. This made the knowledge incredibly brittle. As the empire's fortunes began their long, slow decline after the 11th century, the cracks in this human system started to show. Political turmoil and violent palace coups became more frequent. In such chaos, what happened to that one trusted craftsman, or the emperor who held the full formula in his memory? If they were removed suddenly, without the careful ritual of passing the secret to a successor, a link in the chain was broken forever. Furthermore, the empire's shrinking borders had a direct physical impact. It began to lose control of the distant regions that supplied the crude naphtha, the lifeblood of the weapon. Even if the recipe survived in a scholar's mind, the specialized materials to recreate it became impossible to reliably obtain. The great logistical machine that fueled the flame was grinding to a halt. By the time the armies of the Fourth Crusade arrived at the city's gates in the year 1204, the legend of Greek fire was far more potent than its reality. Historical accounts of that brutal sack make no mention of the legendary jets of flame defending the harbor. The secret seems to have already faded, a ghost of its former self. The Crusaders' looting and destruction then scattered the last remaining pieces of institutional knowledge, burning libraries and workshops, and dispersing the few who might have understood fragments of the process. It was a quiet, unceremonious end for a weapon that had once saved civilization. The flame did not go out in a dramatic battle. It simply flickered and died, forgotten in a crumbling palace, its final keepers gone. This raises a haunting question about the nature of preservation itself. What does it truly mean to save something for the future? The Byzantines protected their secret with a zeal that spanned centuries, yet that very protection sealed its fate, making it impossible to outlive the empire that created it. Their greatest triumph became a treasure they could not pass on. The secret did not vanish without leaving a trace in the written word. While no official Byzantine manual has ever been found, whispers of the formula echo through the archives of their rivals and chroniclers. It is a literary ghost hunt where historians must piece together truth from fragmented, second-hand accounts written in awe, fear, and sometimes deliberate misdirection. One of the most tantalizing documents is a 9th century text known as the Liber Igneum, the Book of Fires, attributed to a shadowy figure named Marcus Graecus, Marcus the Greek. Within its pages are recipes for various incendiary mixtures, and some scholars believe one or more may be corrupted, incomplete versions of the true Greek fire formula, perhaps recorded by someone who witnessed its effects but never learned its full secrets. The recipes often include familiar ingredients like petroleum, resin, and sulfur, but they lack the precise instructions or the mention of that critical, mysterious additive that made the Byzantine weapon so unique. They are like hearing a distant, muddled echo of a symphony. You recognize some of the instruments, but the harmony is lost. From the other side of the battlefield, Arab historians provide a different kind of evidence. Writers like al-Masudi did not have the recipe, but they described its terrifying performance with vivid, almost clinical detail. They noted how it clung and burned on water, how it could not be extinguished by it, and the sheer psychological devastation it wrought upon their fleets. These accounts are invaluable because they come from observers who had every incentive to understand the weapon that defeated them, yet they still spoke of it with a tone of stunned reverence. Later, from within the Byzantine world itself, we get a rare tactical perspective from an unlikely source, a princess and scholar. Anna Komnene, in her history called the Alexiad, describes the use of Greek fire in the wars of her father, Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. She writes not as a chemist but as a strategist, detailing how the siphons were deployed from ships and how the fire was hurled in pots from the walls. Her work confirms the weapon's continued use and its integration into military doctrine centuries after its invention. Each of these fragments is a piece of a shattered mosaic. The challenge for modern historians is immense. They must cross-reference a recipe from a Spanish translation of an Arabic text of a Greek original, all while separating likely chemical facts from layers of mythic embellishment. Was the substance truly inextinguishable, or did it just seem that way in the panic of battle? Did it really ignite on contact with water, or was that a legend born from its resistance to being doused? This literary detective work is painstaking and ongoing. Every new digital analysis of a medieval manuscript, every fresh translation of a forgotten chronicle, offers another potential clue. But these texts alone cannot light the fire again. They provide the instructions, but the final proof must come from the crucible. The quest to reconstruct the lost art, therefore, moves from the quiet of the library to the controlled environment of the modern laboratory, where historians and chemists work together to test the ancient words with modern science. The quest to relight the ancient flame has moved from dusty manuscripts to the clean, controlled spaces of modern laboratories. Here, historians and chemists work side by side, not as warriors, but as detectives attempting the ultimate reverse engineering project. Their goal is not to create a new weapon, but to solve a centuries-old puzzle, to build a substance that behaves exactly as the terrified accounts describe. They begin with the known basics, mixing crude oil, the ancient naphtha, with thick pine resin to create that essential, clinging quality. But then the experiments truly begin, testing the proposed secret ingredients one by one. Could it have been quicklime reacting with seawater to generate its own heat, or perhaps saltpeter adding a more explosive ignition? Each mixture is carefully prepared and then subjected to a series of brutal, practical tests. It is not enough to simply burn. To be considered a candidate for the true Greek fire, the liquid must pass a rigorous historical checklist. Can it be projected in a steady stream from a pump, or is it too thin or too viscous? When it lands on water, does it float and continue to burn with a sizzling ferocity, or does it sink or fizzle out? Most crucially, when water is poured onto it, does the fire defiantly persist? These experiments are messy, fascinating, and often surprising. Some mixtures ignite with a satisfying roar but are too volatile to store safely. Others burn well but lack the sticky, adhesive quality that made the Byzantine weapon so horrifyingly effective. Alongside the chemistry, engineers have turned to the mechanics of delivery. Using clues from ancient texts and the few surviving illustrations, they have constructed working models of the famed Siphon. They experiment with dual piston pumps and bronze nozzles, learning firsthand the challenges of pressurizing a volatile liquid and igniting it reliably at the moment of projection. The sound of a reconstructed siphon firing, even in a safe test pond, carries an echo of that ancient terror. While no modern team can claim to have perfectly rediscovered the lost formula, these experiments achieve something profoundly important. They prove the concept was not a myth, but a feat of sophisticated, applied science. Every successful test that produces a sticky, water-resistant flame validates the historical records. It shows that the Byzantine artisans were not mere custodians of a lucky accident, but masters of chemistry and fluid dynamics. They understood the properties of their materials intimately, and they engineered a complete system to weaponize that knowledge. This modern quest does more than satisfy historical curiosity. It builds a tangible bridge across time. It turns descriptions of magic and divine wrath back into what they always were, testimony to human ingenuity. The real magic was not in defying nature, but in understanding and harnessing it with a skill so advanced it appeared supernatural to those who faced it. Greek fire's story is not one of a dead end, but of a passing of the torch. It stands as a brilliant, fiery chapter in the much longer history of how technology reshapes conflict. For centuries, it proved a profound idea that a single, well-guarded technological advantage could define an entire era of warfare. The Byzantium that mastered this art was a fortress of secrets, but the world outside was learning a different lesson, one of diffusion and scale. By the 14th century, a new transformative substance was spreading across Eurasia, not along a single, secretive supply chain, but along the bustling trade routes of the Silk Road, gunpowder. Early cannons began to appear on European battlefields, crude and unpredictable, but carrying a revolutionary promise. Like Greek fire, these weapons delivered shock and awe from a distance. They could batter down walls and shatter formations with a thunderous roar, but there was a fundamental difference. Gunpowder recipes, while valuable, were not impossible to keep secret in the same absolute way. The knowledge spread. The materials saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal were more widely available than the specific naphtha seeps of the Black Sea. This meant any determined kingdom could, with enough effort, establish its own arsenals. Warfare was no longer about guarding one perfect recipe, but about mastering the industrial capacity to produce thousands of cannonballs and barrels of powder. The symbolic end of one age and the clear beginning of the next came in 1453. The massive walls of Constantinople, which had stood for 1,000 years, finally fell. They were breached not by a secret chemical jet, but by the relentless, hammering impact of Ottoman siege cannon, a technology the empire itself had once possessed but failed to adopt at the decisive scale. The fall was a stark lesson. The age of a single, guarded technological monopoly was over, replaced by an age of proliferating firepower. Yet, if the substance became obsolete, the principles it embodied did not. The tactical concepts Greek fire perfected, area denial and psychological dominance, never left the battlefield. They simply found new forms. The fear inspired by a line of cannons, or later, by machine gun fire sweeping a field, operates on the same human instinct as the sight of a burning sea. It creates a zone of unacceptable risk. Modern militaries still seek that decisive technological edge, that single system that can deter an enemy simply by existing. The pursuit of supremacy moved from chemistry to ballistics, to aviation, to digital networks, but the core idea remains: to control the battle space not just with force, but with the terrifying anticipation of it. In that sense, the legacy of Greek fire burns on, not in its lost formula, but in the eternal quest to master the next element of war. But the story of Greek fire did not end when its last flame was extinguished. It simply changed form, leaping from the pages of history into the boundless realm of human imagination. For centuries after its disappearance, the weapon's memory fueled legends of dragons whose breath could melt stone and set seas ablaze. These were not random myths, they were cultural echoes of a very real terror witnessed by generations of sailors and soldiers. The archetype of an unstoppable, clinging fire became a staple of medieval epics and romances, a symbol of a power so great it felt less like invention and more like stolen magic. This transformation from technology to myth reveals a profound truth. When something is powerful enough and mysterious enough, it ceases to be a mere tool and becomes a story we tell to explain the unexplainable. That story has proven incredibly durable. Look at the green, volatile wildfire in the world of Game of Thrones, a substance so dangerously potent it is stored in secret caches beneath a city, waiting to be unleashed in a final, catastrophic defense. The parallels are unmistakable, a liquid fire that burns on water, guarded as a state secret and wielded as a last resort. In countless video games and fantasy novels, you will find its spiritual descendants, alchemical flames, and ancient incendiary oils that offer players and readers a taste of that same devastating, awe-inspiring power. This cultural endurance speaks to something primal within us. Greek fire represents the ultimate fantasy of a lost superweapon, a piece of knowledge so potent that possessing it feels like holding the keys to destiny itself. It taps into our deep fascination with forgotten arts and the allure of controlling a force that seems to border on the elemental. In our modern stories, it is rarely just a plot device, it is a symbol. It stands for the dangerous price of power, the fragility of secret knowledge, and the haunting question of whether some discoveries are too volatile to be kept safe. By surviving in our myths and media, Greek fire has achieved a kind of immortality. It reminds us that the most impactful inventions are never just about their function. They become mirrors for our hopes, our fears, and our endless curiosity about the blurred line where advanced science meets the territory of legend. There is another, quieter consequence to commanding a dragon's breath. While the chronicles celebrate the victories, they remain silent on the lingering shadow, those flames cast upon the very waters they were meant to defend. The Golden Horn, that sheltered harbor that gave Constantinople its maritime life, likely paid a hidden price for its own protection. Greek fire was in essence a medieval form of napalm, a dense cocktail of crude petroleum, pine resins, and other chemicals. When deployed within the confined, relatively still waters of the harbor, its impact did not end when the last ember cooled. Each use was an environmental event. Thick, black plumes of toxic smoke would have hung over the water and the city, an acrid haze that carried more than just the scent of victory. For the citizens watching from the walls, the air itself would have tasted of sulfur and burned pitch, a tangible reminder of the cost of survival. But the more lasting damage happened beneath the surface. Not all of the sticky, viscous liquid would have burned away. Significant residues would have sunk through the water column, settling on the harbor floor as a toxic sludge. This layer, accumulating over decades and centuries of drills and actual engagements, would have created a poisoned seabed. Marine life in that immediate area would have struggled, with shellfish and other bottom feeders likely suffering the most from the contamination. The water quality in the sheltered inlet, already challenged by the waste of a vast metropolis, would have been further degraded by these periodic infusions of chemical waste. No medieval source mentions this, of course. The concept of environmental impact simply did not exist within their framework of warfare or urban management. The harbor's primary functions were military and commercial, its health measured by its depth for ships and its security from enemies. Yet from our modern perspective, This adds a profound layer of irony to the story. The very weapon that safeguarded the city's existence also subtly poisoned its lifeline. It forces us to consider that the defense of a civilization is never a simple equation. Every tool of power creates a ripple effect, a series of unintended consequences that echo long after the immediate threat has passed. For Constantinople, the Golden Horn was both a shield and a sacrifice, its waters bearing silent witness to the hidden cost of holding back the dark. The longevity of Greek fire is a historical anomaly. Most military advantages are fleeting, countered within a generation. Yet this one weapon held its power for roughly 500 years, a span that saw kingdoms rise and fall. Its endurance was not an accident, but the result of a perfect, self-reinforcing strategic system. At its core, you had a genuinely revolutionary technology, a substance so alien in its behavior it bypassed all contemporary countermeasures. There was no known defense against a fire that burned on water and clung to everything. But the substance alone was not enough. Its true power was locked in place by an institutional obsession with secrecy so total it became a cultural doctrine. This was not a patent to be licensed, it was a state sacrament. That secrecy allowed for the third pillar, deep integration. Greek fire was not an add-on. It was woven into the very fabric of Byzantine defense, from the design of their ships to the architecture of their harbor walls, creating a layered deterrent that was both physical and psychological. An enemy had to solve not one puzzle, but three: crack the chemistry, steal the delivery system, and then defeat a military trained for centuries to use it. The geopolitical landscape of the era played to these strengths perfectly. For centuries, the empire's greatest rivals, whether the Umayyad Caliphate or the Bulgar Khans, were primarily land powers. Their naval traditions were younger, and their scientific institutions, while advanced, were not positioned to reverse engineer a secret guarded with such religious fervor. The weapon thrived in a context where the Byzantine Empire, though often pressured, maintained enough centralized strength to control its secrets, its supply chains, and its skilled personnel. This points to the ultimate lesson: a technological edge is a fragile thing. It is meaningless without the institutional muscle to produce it, protect it, and wield it with strategic wisdom. Greek fire did not fail because someone invented a better fire. It faded because the empire that nurtured it began to crumble from within, losing the territories that supplied its ingredients, the stability that protected its artisans, and the cohesive power that made its secrets inviolable. Its long reign shows that the most formidable weapon is never just a tool. It is the expression of a civilization's total capacity, its discipline, its ingenuity, and its will to survive. When that civilization weakens, even its miracles can turn to ash. To understand the true marvel of Greek fire, we must see it not as a sudden miracle, but as the final, brilliant stroke in a long history of fire warfare. For millennia, armies had sought to harness flame. The ancient Greeks used fire ships, sending unmanned vessels ablaze into enemy fleets, a tactic of chaos more than control. Archers dipped their arrows in pitch and set them alight, creating a rain of fire, but one that was scattered and brief. There were even recipes like the legendary oil of Medea, a thick, burning substance, but these were often static traps or thrown pots, lacking any true projection. What separated the Byzantine weapon from all these ancestors was a single, transformative quality: reliable and directed deployability. Earlier incendiaries were events, you lit them and hoped. Greek fire was a system, you aimed it and commanded. The heart of this system was the Siphon, a tool that turned a dangerous chemical into a precise instrument of war. It was not a catapult hurling a single burning bundle. It was a continuous, mobile flamethrower. An operator could sweep the jet across the water, leading a target, cutting off an escape route, or focusing relentlessly on a single ship's weak point. This gave commanders something unprecedented on the ancient seas: tactical flexibility with a weapon of mass terror. It moved the power of fire from the realm of area effect into the realm of aimed artillery. This evolution becomes even clearer when we look east. In China, brilliant alchemists were pioneering their own fiery path with early gunpowder mixtures. They developed fire lances, tubes that shot out flames and shrapnel, and created explosive grenades and rockets. These were formidable advancements, but they emerged later and through completely independent discovery. The key distinction lies not in potency, but in application and philosophy. The Chinese innovations were part of a broader exploration of gunpowder's potential, leading toward the world of explosives and ballistics. The Byzantine achievement, however, was one of intense, singular focus. They poured centuries of refinement into one specific device for one overriding purpose: naval dominance. They were not generalists of flame, they were supreme specialists of the sea-borne inferno. This specialization was guarded by an institutional secrecy without parallel. While knowledge of gunpowder components spread gradually along trade routes, the formula for Greek fire was locked within a vault of state security, protected by ritual, family lineage, and severe consequence. No other civilization devoted such monumental effort to guarding a single piece of military knowledge. By placing Greek fire alongside these other ancient incendiaries, its silhouette sharpens. It was not a magical anomaly, but the most refined and strategically impactful evolution of ancient pyrotechnics. It represented a pinnacle, a point where chemical knowledge, mechanical engineering, and grand military strategy fused under unique historical circumstances. The Byzantines did not invent fire as a weapon, they perfected its delivery and then built an entire empire's defense around that perfection. They took an ancient, chaotic element and gave it the discipline of a soldier, the range of an archer, and the psychological weight of a divine judgment. This comparison strips away the myth to reveal the deeper truth. The real miracle was not the flame itself, but the civilization that could sustain its secret and its science for half a millennium. Such an achievement, however, could not exist in a vacuum. It required a constant, vigilant mind to maintain its edge, a mind that saw threats not just from beyond the walls, but from within the very system that created the weapon. The ultimate guardian of the flame was not a general or an alchemist, but the emperor himself. In the Byzantine world, the secret of Greek fire was more than a military asset. It was a sacred trust, a cornerstone of imperial authority. Emperors like Constantine IV, Leo III, and Basil II did not merely command armies that used the weapon. They personally directed its deployment in the empire's most desperate hours. This was not a delegation of power, it was a direct manifestation of it. The emperor's intimate involvement sent a clear message to both his subjects and his enemies that the defense of Christendom and the survival of the empire flowed through his divine mandate. He was seen as God's appointed steward on earth, and the control of this seemingly miraculous fire was the most tangible proof of that holy sanction. To hold the secret was to hold a fragment of celestial authority. This ideology was built into the very geography of power. The workshops that produced the weapon were not located in some distant arsenal. They were almost certainly housed within the secure confines of the great palace complex in Constantinople. Think about the symbolism of that. The substance that protected the empire was brewed and stored in the heart of the imperial home, under the emperor's literal roof. This made Greek fire a direct extension of his personal will, as much a part of the imperial regalia as the crown or the scepter. Its use in battle was not just a tactic, it was a performance of imperial divinity, a spectacle where the emperor's earthly power seemed to summon elemental forces. This centralization served a practical purpose, ensuring absolute control, but it also created a profound vulnerability. The secret's fate became inextricably tied to the stability of the throne itself. In times of strong, uninterrupted rule, the system flourished. Knowledge passed securely from one emperor to his chosen heir, and from one master craftsman to the next apprentice within the palace walls. But the Byzantine throne was often a perilous place, subject to violent coups, bloody successions, and periods of utter anarchy. During these fractures, what happened to that carefully guarded knowledge? If an emperor was overthrown or met a sudden end, did the secret die with him before he could pass it on? Worse, could the weapon be turned inward, its horrific power unleashed in a civil war, a brother-against-brother conflict where the empire's greatest shield became the instrument of its own self-mutilation? The very concentration of power that made the weapon so effective also made it dangerously fragile, a flame that could be snuffed out by a single moment of political chaos. This reveals the deeper political genius behind Greek fire. It was engineered to be more than a naval weapon. It was a pillar of the imperial ideology, a tool designed to hold the state itself together. Its existence justified the emperor's absolute authority, and his control of it reinforced the social order. For the people of Constantinople, the sight of the imperial dromons patrolling the harbor with their siphons was a daily reminder of the divine protection their emperor provided. It fostered a sense of security and destiny that was essential for the cohesion of a vast, multi-ethnic empire constantly under threat. The weapon did not just burn enemy ships, it forged an identity. It was a constant, fiery argument for the necessity of a strong, centralized, and divinely ordained ruler. In this light, the loss of the formula was not merely a technological regression. It was a symptom of a deeper decay within the imperial idea itself. When the throne could no longer guarantee its own stability, it could no longer safeguard the secrets that defined its power. The physical reality of Greek fire seems to have vanished almost as completely as its formula. For all its legendary use across 5 centuries, archaeologists have never unearthed a smoking gun, a labeled siphon, or a sealed amphora of the substance itself. The weapon is a ghost in the historical record, leaving us to search for its faint imprint on the world it once dominated. The most promising clues come from the seafloor, where bronze tubes and nozzles have been recovered from Byzantine shipwrecks. These artifacts spark immediate speculation. Could they be parts of the famed projector? Yet without context, a bronze tube is just a tube. It could be part of a bilge pump or a simple conduit. The absence of a complete, identifiable siphon assembly is a profound silence in the archaeological record, a testament perhaps to the Byzantine success in keeping their technology out of enemy hands, even in defeat. If a dromon sank, its most precious weapon was likely salvaged or destroyed to protect the secret. Another avenue of search lies in the very stones of Constantinople and the sediments of the Golden Horn Harbor. In theory, advanced chemical analysis could detect the unique molecular fingerprints of ancient petroleum and pine resin residues baked into fortress walls or settled in the mud. The reality, however, is a scientific labyrinth, isolating a specific 800-year-old chemical signature from centuries of urban pollution, later industrial waste, and natural decay is like trying to hear a single, whispered word in a roaring stadium. The signal is drowned by the noise of time, so we turn to more indirect yet compelling forms of evidence. The design of the dromon warships themselves offers a strong architectural hint. These vessels were built with uniquely reinforced and structured prows, a feature that makes little sense for ramming, an outdated tactic by their era, but perfect for mounting the heavy recoil and weight of a bronze siphon. It is a silent blueprint pointing to the weapon's central role. Then there are the eyes of the past, the iconographic clues in surviving manuscripts and mosaics. While not engineering diagrams, these illustrations often show Byzantine ships projecting streams of fire toward enemy vessels. They are symbolic, yes, but they consistently depict a direct, continuous jet from a fixed tube on the ship's bow, corroborating the written descriptions of the siphon's function and placement. This frustrating lack of a definitive artifact does not diminish the weapon's reality. It reframes the entire search. The story of Greek fire is not one we can hold in our hands from a museum display case. It is a puzzle assembled from 1,000 fragments, a ship's reinforced beam here, a chemist's replicated test there, a terrified line in an Arab chronicle over there. This forces historians into the role of forensic reconstructors, piecing together a portrait from circumstantial evidence. The empty space where the physical proof should be is, in its own way, the most telling evidence of all. It speaks to a technology so guarded, so integrated into the state's survival, that it was designed to leave no trace behind for rivals and ultimately for us. The fire was meant to burn clean, leaving only ash and ore in its wake, and in that, its creators succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. By the 13th century, the empire's internal fires burned hotter than any siphon could produce. The final, confirmed flashes of Greek fire in major conflict did not come against an external foe, but in the brutal civil wars that tore the restored Byzantine Empire apart after the Fourth Crusade. Brother turned against brother, faction against faction, and in these desperate clashes, the empire's ultimate weapon was likely turned inward. This was the grim twilight of a technology designed for unity, now fueling division. Even as these internal struggles raged, a new sound was echoing from the west, the deep, percussive boom of early cannon. These gunpowder weapons were crude, unpredictable, and terrifyingly loud. They represented a different philosophy of power, one based not on a single, perfect secret, but on the industrial capacity to produce many imperfect machines. The writing was on the wall, or rather, it was being blasted into the wall. The age of the guarded recipe was giving way to the age of mechanical artillery. The knowledge of Greek fire, already strained by political chaos and the loss of distant supply regions, became a ghost in the palace corridors. It fragmented, passed down in broken whispers to apprentices who may never have seen it used in true naval combat. The specialized workshops fell silent, their masters dying without successors in a realm more concerned with immediate survival than preserving ancient marvels. This slow erosion culminated in the silence of 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II's massive cannons began their relentless hammering of the Theodosian walls, and his fleet moved to seal the Golden Horn. The legendary jets of flame did not answer. The harborside siphons remained cold. There was no burning sea to drive the Ottoman ships away. The secret had not been stolen in a dramatic act of espionage. It had simply faded away, like a forgotten language spoken by the last of its elders. Its final silence was not a bang, but a whimper, lost in the thunder of the new age it could not withstand. This quiet disappearance marks a profound historical pivot, the moment a civilization's defining technological edge dissolved not through defeat in battle, but through the gradual decay of the intricate human system that sustained it. The secret formula of Greek fire was never just a recipe for fire, it was the very recipe for Byzantine survival. For over 500 years, this technological shield allowed a shrinking empire to endure against overwhelming odds, preserving a final bastion of Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian faith within its legendary walls. Its story weaves together threads of brilliant innovation, ruthless state secrecy, masterful psychological warfare, and a haunting, ultimate loss. While the exact chemical mixture may be lost to the silence of time, its legacy is permanently etched into the narrative of human ingenuity. This forgotten flame teaches us a profound lesson about the shape of history itself, demonstrating how a single, guarded technological advantage can alter the destiny of civilizations for centuries. It forces us to ask, what is the true lifespan of an idea? The Byzantines showed that the guardianship of knowledge, the intricate human system built to protect it, is every bit as critical as the moment of discovery. They perfected a weapon, but more importantly, they perfected a system of control, and for a long, glorious age it worked. As we close this chapter on a fire that once burned on water, it's worth turning the question inward. What secrets do we guard today in our labs and our digital vaults that might one day seem like impossible magic to future generations? What fragile systems are we relying upon to keep our own defining edges sharp? If this journey into a lost world of ancient science and strategy captivated you, there are countless other mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Let us know which lost technology or forgotten chapter of history you'd like us to explore next.